Hey, welcome back to the Oz Shift podcast. Today's guest is the founder of Self-Employed Life. Actually, it's a podcast as well as a book. And man's name is Jeffrey Shutt. Now, Jeff is an awesome guy. Jeffrey, my apologies. And it was cool. I say awesome because he's warm. He's an inviting human, but he also has a humongous heart for the people he serves, who are typically those who are thinking about becoming self-employed or who are currently self-employed that are missed that little piece of maybe drive or maybe just community or information that it takes to actually grow and scale your business, but doing with heart behind the scenes. He actually has some interesting beliefs that are opposite to your normal views of what you see in the world, and I think some of the best ways. And we have a great conversation unpacking that, his childhood a little bit, my childhood a little bit, and the journey we've both kind of gone through, and mostly him, to get to the point now where he leads individuals and guides them through processes and viewpoints to actually have great success. We have a really cool philosophical conversation also early on in the podcast that I think will be useful for your ears and also for your heart. So without further ado, hop into the episode and I'll see you there. All right, welcome into the show. We are here with, we're going to call it our new friend, Jeffrey, man. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Anthony. Glad to be here with you.
I like it, man. I'm excited. So you can tell certain people are pros because, like, one, the way the camera looks, the flow, the mic, like, so we're going to be talking to a pro today, people, just in case you didn't know, which I'm excited about because there's a lot of things that I like to get into that, like, most of the people in my life I don't get to talk to about, my business and small business, which you're kind of passionate about, and my world. My wife, after a while, she's like, I don't want to hear about it anymore. Can you just, like, talk to somebody else? And so we'll open that up. But I always start the show with a single question. Then I'll talk less. You'll talk more. But here's the question. I'm walking around town. I sit down at a coffee shop. There's this cool guy sitting next to me. To you, I don't know you. For some odd reason, you feel compelled to turn and start talking to me. In your opinion, why should I listen to you?
Well, why should you listen to me? Gosh, what a great question. For one, I'd like to think, as people say me often, I'm warm and welcoming. So I think there's an instant welcoming vibe that I want to project, so that you can have a genuine conversation. And I think, why do we want to talk to anybody? Why do we want to connect? Because there's something to learn. I hope to maybe what I could do is spark an element of curiosity in connecting with somebody so that they want to know more about what I do. And I'm likely to do that very exact scenario, by the way, if I see somebody working at a coffee shop on a laptop, because I suspect they might be some of my people, my people who are entrepreneurs, business owners out there doing really big things in a bold way in the world. And I'm very likely to start a conversation and say, hey, what do you do? Tell me about what you're up to.
I like that. It's funny. I'm more like that too. And my wife doesn't like that I'm like that. She's like, you stop talking to people in public.
Yeah, my kids cringe.
But I also think that, like, my kids, they see it. I think there's something to them to understand, like, you should interact with humanity. For example, this is an odd thing, but it just happened. I'm surprised I didn't talk about this. And like with my family or anything, but I was at the airport coming back from Austin, Texas, and I'm walking down to get some food, and some woman leaves her table. And as she's leaving her table, I walk over, and I'm talking maybe a single second before I put my bag down. I put my bag, another guy puts his pizza box down. And I look at him, and he looks at me, and I go, you just want to share it with me? He goes, yeah. So this guy named Nathan. So Nathan had his business, his colleague Nathan with him. We had a good hour-long, awesome conversation. Complete strangers. I know about their kids, what they do in the summertime. Like, it was awesome. And I go, man, if we didn't have the ability just to talk to strangers, you'd miss out on that kind of stuff.
And speaking of airport lounges, I have a very well-branded laptop skin, which has my book on the back of it, and a quick quote from the book. And airport lounge is a lot, and it gets a lot of attention. And I do that in part because I want people to know about the book, but it's also, it invites the conversation. So people come up to me and be like, hey, are you by chance the author of that book? And next thing you know, we're having a great conversation about being self-employed and about my book, and hey, it sells books as well. But I do things like that specifically for conversation starters.
Wow. I've never even considered making a custom laptop skin.
Yeah.
That's a good idea, dude. I like that one. I might have to steal it from you. But I like the idea of not having anything on my laptop also. So I have to see where it fits in. Not question about the humanity of this, because this is something that's not an easy thing for people to do, or sometimes it is. Who knows? Were you always kind of open like this? Was this always a natural, like, kind of inclination to be interactive and talking like strangers and humans?
You know, I'll say on the surface, not at all. I mean, I consider myself an introvert. I'm not somebody that, like,
Interesting.
I don't,
Right.
despite the fact I'm a professional speaker, I will say I tend to not like crowds. But for the very same reason that I like being a speaker is very similar to starting these conversations. I think a lot of introverts, we like intimate conversations, right? So
Yeah.
I love one-to-one conversations with that I can have with individuals. And I love being a speaker. And I find a lot of introverts are speakers on stages. And I think there's a couple of reasons for it. One is by nature, you're probably accustomed to being in uncomfortable situations, right? And being on a stage,
Mhm.
if you're an introvert, is uncomfortable, but that's not a new
Very.
emotion for you if you're an introvert. So,
Yeah.
and I also, for myself anyway, I don't know if this is true for a lot of people that consider themselves introverts, but we want to dodge the spotlight and we crave the spotlight at the same time. There's a
Yeah.
way in which you're craving it because you likely haven't gotten it a lot in your life because you've pulled yourself back and kept yourself in the back of the line.
Mhm.
So, I'd say yes, it has always been I've always spoken to people. It's also not always been my choice. A quick story. Years ago when I lived in New York City, my kids always have known that children are drawn to me. Now, I've spent 40 years being a portrait photographer for affluent families and doing family
Gotcha.
portraits. And part of that is, kids naturally are drawn to me, and I'm very comfortable with kids. So I'm on the New York
Yeah.
City subway, and this woman has her hands full. She's got a toddler in her arms. She's got another child by her knees, and she's got a diaper bag. And she turns to me and hands me her baby. Like, this is on a New York City subway. Just like turns and hands me her baby. So, my kids who were with me at the time said it didn't surprise them because, again, I think I come across as welcoming and safe. And
Yeah.
so I just think you exude an energy, and she knew that I was safe with her child, and she handed off her child
There
to
you
me.
go.
So I don't
That's
know that I
crazy.
could help having conversations and interactions with humans like this. It just seems to
This
happen.
is what it is. Yeah, it's drawn in. It's funny you say it that way because I also find that introverts have an interesting ability to, when they're in public and not the center of attention, they watch and absorb, I think, and they process more about humanity than everybody else is doing.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
they make
Yeah.
credible communicators.
Yeah.
You find that to be a way you operate?
100%. I think that I always say that's why I became a photographer. I think I was so shy as a kid. I just sat back and observed for the first 14, 15 years of my life. I don't think I participated a lot. Like, I wasn't the kid that was running around with the neighborhood kids. I wasn't, as a 10, 12-year-old, I actually wasn't participating in anything else anybody else was doing. But I was always observing. And for me, the way to translate that into something useful was to become a photographer, because now I had a reason to get outdoors and be outside,
Yeah.
and just photograph life, photograph either the people or just angles and things I found interesting in the world. And no, 100%. And I think to this day, 40 years later in my career, where my career now is primarily as being a business coach, that very same sense of observation is what plays out as a coach, right? I always say my photographer's brain sees in people what they can't see in themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just,
Awesome.
it really is. I would say if I were to call out like an innate way in which my brain works, it is observation. You're 100% right on that.
I like that. And I think it's kind of a necessary thing for us. One, I think there's a part of our brains that have to do that for security and, safety reasons for public. But there's an extra level of what you do when you can take it and go, okay, let me stockpile this or process this or analyze this. And then you bring something forward from that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, I find that we get older in life, there are individuals who definitely have 20 years on me, but vastly less wisdom. And I don't say it to be like, I'm super wise. Look at me. I'm little Yoda. I'm not saying that. But there's a certain level of wisdom that I carry. And it's simply, in my opinion, because things happen and I stop and I analyze.
Yeah.
Where did I do well? What did I not do well? It actually is a critical piece of my business success, I believe, because there's things, if I have this going on and something took place, someone sends a fiery email, they're not too happy with something. And if I don't stop and go, okay, where did I mess up? Is it my fault? Did I really, and find that and go, oh yeah, I did. If I can't do that and be critical, I don't have the wisdom to give my son to be a leader in some specific way. So what do you think? How does, I guess, leadership can be a couple ways. One, it could be, I've had success follow me. Just because I've had success. There's also, I think, leadership that comes from a stance. What you're saying is I observe, I can learn, And then as a business, self-employed, how critical is it to be a leader of both yourself and other people from a place of wisdom, information, or observation?
I think one of the most powerful things I've learned about leadership, and that was developed in a leadership training program, was the idea that there are different stages of leadership. For example, if there's front of the room leadership, there's back of the room leadership, and there's side of the room leadership. And I would say by nature, I'm not a front of the room leader. I can be, but I prefer to lead from kind of the side of the room. And the leader from the side of the room will tend to be more of an observer. So to me, it really helped that there's just different learning styles. There isn't one way. And for me, I think, as the theme of your show, how it shifts, right? So I think I spend most of my life in a side of the room leadership role, in that I'm observing, I'm maybe leading gently, but I know very well when it's important for me to take the role of being a front of the room leadership because somebody's relying on me as that leader. Yeah. So I don't think it's, I think by nature, as I said, I think I probably spend most of my time in a side of the room leadership, supporting other people, observing, making changes and impacts in the world shifts I'd like to see in the world. But I know when to step up and be in the front of the room as a leader when it's in service to the people that I want to lead. And for me, it's business owners. So I know when to step up.
I get it. It's funny as I feel like I intimately get it, like it's partially me. So so I love being in front of the stage. I'm an introverted extrovert. Mm-hmm. I like to recharge alone, but when I'm out, man, I'm on. Like I'm fine. I'll talk to you, we'll hang out, right? But I like a full day of that, I'm going home. Don't talk to me. Like I'm gonna sit with my blanket in the corner. But I do know that there is a part of me that also has that same dance of like, I'm not the guy that wants to be on social media in front of the world. Like, look at me all day. I'm amazing. Mm-hmm. But so most of the time I find myself tucked away, like privately doing my thing. And when I have something of value to give, that's when it comes forth. But it's like you said, there's those settings where you have to understand when you must be the front and lead. But I also think like I did it when I was in sports. When I played football, I was the guy that was a leader on the team, but I wasn't the outright, outspoken, loud leader. I was the guy that worked my tail off and you respected me. And you felt bad if I didn't like what you did. You felt bad if you let me down kind of thing. Yeah. And I think there is that kind of like back of room, side of room leadership I've always had. As you said that, I was like, I didn't even consider it that way.
Well, and I think the way it's always presented to me, which honestly, I think it's just a truth in the world in which you live in. Like I finally get into more, I don't want to say disputes, but people have called me out thinking I particularly on important issues in our society, people have called me out to say they feel like I'm speaking out of both sides. And I'm like, well, I don't know when it came to be that we're supposed to, as a society or as a humans, that we limit ourselves thinking we can only hold one truth, right? We can hold multiple truths at the same time. And sometimes that may seem contradictory to other people, but if it's your truth, it's your truth. And I think the way leadership tends to be presented is that you're one or the other, like a lot of things in life. You're this or you're that. Like the world is black and white. And I think there's a belief that only front of the room leadership exists, and people strive to be the front of the room leadership. That's why I really value just understand the different stations of being a leader. I actually think, my goal in life is to be a powerful back of the room leader. I think they're the most powerful. The back of the room leader is the person that just sits in the background, but man, when they speak, worlds shift. They're the ones that don't have to say a lot. We tend to talk more when we're processing. So and our own journeys to wisdom and leadership, we tend to talk these things out. So I'm in great admiration of people who no longer have to talk these things out. They've got it, they own it, they're confident in it, and when they speak, you listen.
Yeah, that's really well said, man. I get little chills when you said that. It's like that's like grandpa in the family who's just sitting back and doesn't say nothing. When he does, like, oh, everybody listen, grandpa said something. It's that's cool, but you're right, because that's the kind of person. I think there's a statement, I don't know where it is. They say if you go hang out with like a person that has thousands of dollars, it'll take you a couple hours to get a good idea. Talk to a person that has a couple $100,000, it may take you half an hour. Talk to a person that has millions of dollars, right, to get a good idea. It's going to take about 15 minutes. Talk to a billionaire. You'll get an answer that's going to change your life in a couple sentences. And it's not to say that the money's but it's like the journey to get there, to have the ability to have that many conversations, to deliver that much value to the world, navigate that, deal with I in my head picture more difficult, hard conversations that have caused a lot of ruckus and problems than we could even fathom when you're sitting with $1 billion in your bank account. which means you have so much more life experience than most people. So you can synthesize it down to a single drop and go, that's the thing you need, and go, oh, change my
Yeah.
life. And so I think that's kind of this, that's what a back of the room leader would be in my mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's, I don't know how true it is, but there's a fable anyway that in Eastern culture, the wisest person is the most silent, right? So there's sort of I've just always held that as a goal, and I'm far from it. You know, I was a kid who my parents tried to pay to not talk. Right. I was, you know, as a kid, my parents were like, I'll give you 50 cents if you don't talk for 10 minutes. And I never got the money. Right. I never got the money. But, you know, I've always held it as a life goal. Like, can you continue to grow in your own wisdom so that you can get your point across in fewer words? And, you know, one thing I love is so much of what we've spoken about, my brain is kind of going in both directions because I love the philosophical conversations about all these things. And I also really love how tangible and useful it is in the real world, and in particular in the world of business, right? I mean, it's the same. If you talk about the philosophy of being the wise man in the village, becoming more silent and saying what they need to say in fewer words, that holds true in marketing, right? The whole goal in marketing is to get your point across in fewer words, right?
Words,
so I love, that's kind of the dance I play in life is, I love diving deep into deep thoughts and overthinking things and the philosophy, but what I really love is the tangible application of things such as that. And I'll share with you a real quick story. We were talking earlier about my laptop skin. You know, it's one thing to enjoy doing that sort of thing and connecting with humans, but I learned early on in my 20s, building my photography business, the actual tangible power of that. So what I did as a budding photographer, trying to launch myself as a premier, you know, photographer for affluent families in a very affluent community, which I was not from, didn't know anything about, but I would walk around with my photographs that were mounted on canvas so that they were a flexible material, and I would roll them up and put them in a long black architect tube, like a tube that one would put blueprints in. Now, you know, I know I'm on video with you, but I just saw your expression. Your expression was, what a weird thing. And that was the point, right? So I would walk around this affluent town, going in and out of children's clothing stores and boutiques and toy stores with this ridiculously odd black tube. Why? Because inevitably somebody would ask me, what's in the tube? And then I would get to pull up my photographs and introduce myself as a photographer to this owner of a high-end children's clothing boutique. Right. So as much as I can enjoy the humanity of connecting with humans, at some point you also realize the power of how you can leverage that to advance your life and your career, your business. And that to me has been the constant. And I think probably the most fun dance of business is, on my podcast, our tagline is business with a soul. Right. So I love leading with soulful connections. And when I could figure out how something is useful in a tangible way, I'm all for it. Then you can leverage it.
And again, I like not just leverage, it creatively leveraging.
Right.
You know, it's the unique little piece that no one thinks about. I've always actually heard it's a great way to do it, but it takes a special mind to be able to do it in practice. Like the things you're telling me, I'm like, this is an exact example of what I've told people, but I would have never thought of this sometime. My brain works in cool ways, but not always like this, we'll call it. Because it's like an accent. It's like a throw pillow on the side that makes the whole room come alive. You know, it's a whole different feel. Where did you get that though? Was that another piece of like your skill set? Did you learn it from somebody else?
You know, I can't, in that case, I certainly can't. In that case, I don't remember honestly, but I will tell you that, you know, again, I love this blend of philosophy and tangible evidence, and ultimately you find out these things work in science. So, or there's a science behind it, which I really love. Like to me, there's a whole, you know, you can have one conversation about manifestation, but the other side of the science side of that conversation is brain priming, right? I mean, there's a real science to the fact that you can prime your brain to see what you want to see, right? Or you can only recognize, and again, that actually harkens back to in Buddhist philosophy, they refer to it as you can only recognize what you already know. So if you really embrace that philosophy that you can only recognize what you already know, you get to choose what is in your brain that you want to recognize. And we all know this phenomenon because of how often there's something we've never heard about before. Somebody tells you about it, a book, a movie, a person, and suddenly you see that person or that book or movie everywhere.
RTX.
The fact of the matter is, the same number was there, right? So
RAS.
what I did really early on in my career was realize the power of how to leverage that. So I'll give you another example. I made my way into the most exclusive country club in the area in which I was launching my photography business way back in the beginning. And when I say made myself my way in, because I don't know how I got past the guard gate who let me drive through. I'm weak on security. The person at the front desk of the club called forward the manager. The manager came out, and I introduced myself to the manager, and I showed him a couple of quick photographs. He was tolerant but not happy that I was taking up his time. But I kept saying to him, I'm not asking anything of you. I just want you to know I exist, because I'm building a photography business to serve the people that you serve. And I just want you to know I exist. 2 days later, he tolerated me. I went on my way. 2 days later, he calls me. And he said, young man, I don't know what you're up to, but keep doing it. He says, in my 15 years of managing this club, no one has ever come in and asked if I knew a family photographer. But one of our members is having a family reunion at our club and just left my office asking if I knew a family photographer. And now I do. Right. And I got the business. And I went on to do a lot of business with members of that club. Now, Anthony, the fact of the matter is, he probably has been asked dozens of times if he knew a family photographer. But he didn't. But now he did, because I had introduced myself. That's brain priming. That's recognizing what you already know. So when you learn, to me, just the formula in business is, you can get philosophical about this stuff, and you could talk about it as manifestation, and you could talk about it in all different ways. But when you realize the power of it, it's at your disposal to leverage it and to use it. So I continue to do strategies like that. Put yourself, I call them, serendipitous moments. Put yourself in places where something magical can happen in the first place, which you're not going to accomplish just sitting at home.
No. And take some boldness to do it too, because the thing you're talking about, it's an interesting thing to say you're introvert and these little things you do to go out there in the world and do uncomfortable stuff. Yeah. But I also think nowadays it's probably better to do it than ever was, because so many people, they want to feel comfortable running the business from the middle of nowhere on the little thing and never have my face on camera. I'll just tick some buttons right. And it goes, no, business is still human. Yeah. Still a connection. You're still selling to other people. Robots aren't buying your stuff right now. Right. So that interaction, I think, is even more critical to it. So as you kind of developed this kind of business and brand around serving individuals who are self-employed and that whole realm, how did it become a thing where you go, I've got to help more people like me? Obviously you saw a problem, saw a missing space in the marketplace somewhere. What did you see? What made you go down that pathway?
So, the real story of it is, I think we're all tired of talking about it in some ways, but really, it really, for me, really started in the pandemic, but the very early moments of the pandemic, because I've been around the rodeo a few times, having been in business for 4 decades. So I've been through a few downturns in the economy, and I lived in New York during 9/11 and, of course, the Great Recession. And at every time in my life when I looked back, I was really frightened for the small person, right? And I was that person, right? I was the one person business, or I was the, photography business of a really small team. So when this pandemic hit in early 2020, I just had a visceral reaction, one that I hadn't really recognized in myself before, but I had just a deep reaction of concern for self-employed business owners, not small business owners, right? Because there's a difference. And in my book, chapter number 1, I make a distinction between small business, entrepreneur, self-employed, solopreneur, all the different terms we use. Small business is a really broad category. And our government has stepped up repeatedly to help small businesses, right? If you have 500 employees, or maybe you have a minimum of 20 employees. But in this case, I became very concerned for the micro businesses, those businesses of 1, businesses of 5. I became really concerned for them. And interestingly enough, the PPP loans, which you may recall, were introduced. And I looked into that further. And Anthony, here's what's cool. For the first time in history, the words self-employed were used in a piece of U.S. legislation. First time in history, in U.S. history. And what those PPP loans, they were designed for self-employed business owners. And it was the first time there's ever been specific help for self-employed. Now, I also knew the government was going to screw it up, and they weren't going to use the proper lingo of self-employed people. they were going to refer to business owners as employees. And sure enough, that messed up a lot of people because business owners don't think of themselves as employees. But honestly, that's where I'll say my rage came from, but in a good way. Like the rage for me started out of fear of how many people's lives were going to be at stake because they were such small businesses or businesses of one that they might not get help. But then I found out through the PPP loans that the government was offering help. And that lit something else in me where I said, you know what? The door has been cracked open. Recognition is there such that it is clear that we matter to the nation's economy. And I am never letting that door closed again. Now, sidebar to that. So that was in 2020. My book, The Self-Employed Life, came out in May of 2021. In May of 2022, I happened to be in New York on the 1-year anniversary of the launch of my book. And coincidentally, I think five or seven of my students from the Self-Employed Business Institute either lived in New York or happened to be visiting New York at the same time. So I threw a dinner party. Two of those students showed up at the dinner party with a mock certificate proclaiming May 4th, the day that we were having dinner, the day of the launch of my book, proclaiming May 4th as National Self-Employed Day. It gave me an idea, and I wondered, does it exist? And if it doesn't, can I make it exist? And I did.
Yeah.
So I filed the application to the national calendar. May 4th is now designated as National Self-Employed Day in the United States. And this May 4th, coming up here very shortly, is the inaugural year of it. And I'm throwing a 4-day celebration in Miami for National Self-Employed Day with a cruise and dinner and a day and a half of coaching and the whole bit. So that's my passion. That's how deeply I feel about really standing up for the one-person businesses, the two-people businesses, but the smallest of small businesses, which are self-employed, people who are running a business to support their lives.
Yeah, it's crazy because, you know, I've been doing this since I was, 26, 7. It's been a long time now, man.
Yeah.
I mean, the majority of probably my adult life, I feel like I've been in business now. Because I think there was something that ticked in me when I got done with the NFL. I was like, I don't want a boss anymore. You know, I think that was my thing. And then it turned into something where it's like, not just a boss, but like I want to have freedom. I want to be home. And it's interesting is there's a dynamic that I had for a long time, which was, well, if you're not self-employed, what kind of idiots have a boss and ask for 2 weeks off? And my best friend actually had a situation that unlocked a whole lot of perspective for me. And then it introduced me to ideas that I didn't realize. But here's what it was. He had an opportunity, and I think this would hopefully play into this, where I hope the person listening, if you hear us talking about self-employed, don't feel like there's anything wrong if you aren't, right? But he had an opportunity to go and be self-employed, to take over a business for his father-in-law. He was making, I think it was like 80,000 a year at the time. His dad said, look, or stepfather or father-in-law. So say, I'll give you this business. He says, I'll start you out at $100,000, give you $20,000 raise. Done properly, this thing has been running for years. You're going to make about $400,000, $500,000 a year doing it if you just do it the same way I have, with the same relationships I have, and don't grow it. If you grow it, exponential. And so in my head, I'm a guy that's like, let's go do this. What do we? Yeah, I got a job. Like if I was in his situation, 100% go do it. I wouldn't even have a question. And he sat with it for a while. And then he ended up not doing it. And I go, what are you scared? He goes, no, I'm not. He says, I sat with it and I asked myself what I really wanted in life. You know, I was like, do I need to have more money? Is more money going to make me happy, make my family happy? Does what I have now, is it eliminate stuff from my life? And so in his processing, he realized like his higher level need was stability.
Mm-hmm.
And the lack of stability in what could be a volatile world of business, he's like, that would remove so much peace of mind for me. And it also, the amount of money I'd make wouldn't make my life much better in terms of what I would want to do. And so he turned it down. I had a respect for that. I go, because there's a lot of people that we don't realize simply having people that are happy in your life is so undervalued. Like there are people that are not self-employed that have to ask their boss for 2 weeks off, but they are so happy because they know they got a job,
100%.
they got a paycheck, they do a thing. Some people like myself, the thought of having to ask somebody for 2 weeks off, or like knowing what I'm doing in a month because the same thing, makes my stomach turn. The thought of it, it sickens me. And so there's a dynamic to it, but I think there is a dance because I wouldn't be able to have the life I have without someone who likes their 9 to 5. And I believe that also the things that my best friend enjoys, right? Let's say he wants to get a good meal at some restaurant that's unique, or he wants to get an iPhone. Without a self-employed human, you don't actually have that item in existence for you. So we have this symbiosis that I think is beautiful in life. But we do see that we're as self-employed people rarely focused on. So I like that you created that.
Yeah, well, and I love the fact that the gentleman you talk about, he asked himself the most important question: what's going to make him happy, right? I mean, I'm very clear that, first of all, at this point, and in fact, I have T-shirts that say unemployable because I'm clearly unemployed. I've never had a traditional job. I've never received a paycheck. To me, in the past anyway, when I've had the fantasy of the grass is always greener, I'm thinking, what would it be like to have a corporate job? Like, to me, that's almost like, it was a fantasy for a long time until I really embraced the fact that I probably would be miserable and it doesn't suit my lifestyle. But you mentioned security, right? I mean, it's relative. I mean, to some people, security is the knowing a paycheck is coming. To me, I think part of what makes me unemployable is I would be terrified that somebody's going to pull the rug out from underneath me. Like, I don't know that I mean, to me, if you're self-employed, at least it's going to be a slow, painful death if you go down, right? But you're not going to just walk into your business one day and fire yourself. So, that's where I live in fear of that. So I think it's relative, I mean, some people are, I actually think in a lot of ways, I have a great admiration for people that have traditional jobs and have the paycheck, because I think in some ways they have a stomach that's much stronger than my own, because of, at least I feel like I've got agency of my own life. I don't know if I would have the stomach, as I see many people do, to allow somebody else to have agency of your life. I kudos to them. I actually think in itself, it's a pretty brave move as well.
I'd agree, man. It's just not for me. And again, I think it took me a while to realize, like, it's not a bad thing. It's just an is. Like, some people got it, some people don't, and shoot, what are you going to do? So I like the dynamic of all that stuff. So we talk about the people that have, the jobs and the self-employed perspective. You've mentioned a couple times, which is your book, you have a podcast. Where does your work show up? If you have this event going on May 4th, which that's awesome. Congratulations on that. I love the idea. Where do you see the service for these people showing up for you? Because I could serve a self-employed person by going, I'm going to take you on a retreat to forget about business, right? I could say, I'm going to help you manage your marriage so you can actually stay focused in your career and your wife doesn't get mad that you're working all the time.
Yeah.
Like, where do you show up for all these human beings that are saying I'm self-employed, to give them a solution that helps their life?
I love that. And I love the examples you gave, because, it's all that, right? That's why my book, I was very specific with my publisher. I wanted to call it The Self-Employed Life. Like, life had to be in there, because it wasn't going to be just business strategies. I was going to touch on a lot of life aspects, because it's a holistic life when you're self-employed. So the way my work shows up is, primarily through the business strategies of being self-employed, because it took me decades to unpack this, but I have to say it was really only within the last few years that I realized how much what I refer to now as translating I've done throughout my life to succeed being self-employed. And when I say translating, what I mean by that is that the by far the greater percentage of the world is transactionally based business, right? The big business, we live in corporate America, so we see the behavior of big businesses and corporations. And for those of us that are running our own businesses, we might get ideas, but we're also a little creeped out by the way other people do business. And I just found myself many, many times throughout my career, just, what's my version of doing sales? What's my version of marketing? Things like, I don't feel good referring to my audience as a target market. Like, I don't know, there's something energetically that's kind of creepy about that, and feeling like if I think of them as a target, aren't they going to feel targeted? And if they feel targeted, like, who wants that, right? So I just have spent all my career translating these things into ways that feel good, right? So I look at sales as an objective to move people. Right? Just move people. You need to emotionally move people, and you need to move them into action, right? Because they're sitting, in order to move them into action, for the most part, you have to move them emotionally first, right? So move them emotionally in the direction to which you believe is going to serve them best, or that they're going to be able to, as a coach, move them in the direction of believing that they're going to be able to serve themselves, right? Because their biggest hang up is that they don't trust themselves to create the change that they want. So, first you have to move people, but then you also have to help them. And this is where the leadership role comes in, help them move into action, right? Because they're sitting on a fence. They're sitting maybe on the side of the fence of not seeking the change that they say they want in their life. Like, what can you do to tangibly move them? So to me, it's reframing sales has been a big part of it. Reframing marketing. One thing I teach in my Self-Employed Business Institute is what we refer to as hug marketing, right? So it's a system. Visually, it looks like a series of concentric circles, very intentionally to bust up and disrupt the idea of a marketing funnel. Because I think a marketing funnel visually also has a terrible energy to it. It's like you're wide open and friendly at the top and you squeeze people through a small hole at the bottom. Like, that's just not how I want to handle people. So I came up with this idea of hug marketing, which is a series of concentric circles where you take responsibility to bring people from the outermost circles, what I call lurkers, right? You have millions of lurkers. Lurkers are people that are watching you, but you don't know them by name. You don't know they're there maybe by volume, but you don't have a particular relationship yet. How do you take those lurkers in your world, step by step, getting closer to you to where they're engaged with you, they're connected with you, and eventually they become clients of yours? And further yet, how do you make them such great and loyal clients that they become hug clients, like the client you would hug if you saw them in person? So to me, that's been my way of translating traditional ways of doing business into unconventional ways of doing business. So that's primarily how I show up. I think as a conduit, and I'll add to that, which is why I started the Self-Employed Business Institute, is I just see a lot of people out there in the world, particularly self-employed business owners, trying to reinvent the wheel. And I think speeding up time is essential in our world today, collapsing time, because first of all, our world needs solutions, and we need solutions sooner than later to a lot of issues. We need solutions, and we need them damn quick, right? So time should not be wasted. Secondly, look at the movement of people who are the biggest change makers and innovators right now. We're, what I like to say, people of a certain age. We're not the 20-year-olds. 20-year-olds are doing it too. But you've got a massive number of people between 40 and 65 that are starting businesses, who are leaving corporate America to do something more purposeful. And, I'm 59, and you get to a point in your life, somewhere between 40, 65, somewhere there's this point in life where you get to this point in life where you just feel like you want to get to where you want to go quicker. I call it a healthy relationship with mortality. Like, you get to the point in your life where, life isn't forever, but you're not, it's not morbid. You're not thinking about that you're going to drop dead anytime soon. That you still have a lot of life in you, and you don't have forever to do these things. You want to get there quicker. So a big part of the way I show up is to help people get to where they want to go quicker. And as a one-to-one coach, all my clients are people who are leaving corporate to become self-employed, right? So the way I work with them is, you're giving yourself 6 months, maybe 12 months to leave your corporate job. Let's get this business set up. Let's figure out what is it that you're passionate about. How can you translate your skill set into a business? So that's why I do still a lot of one-to-one coaching, but I really try to do a lot more group coaching. And that's why I like to speak in front of audiences, because I want to collapse time. I want to get people going and get people to get more done in a shorter period of time, because I think our world needs quick action. I don't think we have we can't dilly-dally here.
No, I agree, man. Everything goes fast because the industry changes, things move. But I think it's also something that, I think there's more focus when there's more speed. You ever done speed reading?
Have I done speed? I think by nature, I read 2 books a week, so I'm a pretty fast reader just by nature. Yeah,
gotcha.
I've done speed dating. I got that idea.
You probably so when do you read like this, or you're always reading kind of thing?
There's ways I'm always reading. I'm not a skimmer. Like, I read for my own podcast. Like, I read every book. So I'm not much of a skimmer. But my challenge, I don't retain real well because I read so much. I take a lot in, and I struggle with retaining it.
Interesting. So the concept that I learned, it was from doing a speed reading course with Jim Quick, which ties to speed you're talking about.
He's amazing.
He goes, think about when you're speed reading, the way that he has found that he is able to retain information, stay focused by the speed at which he reads. And he akens it to driving in a car. You're driving in a car and you're going slow. You're just looking around. You're not really paying attention. Oh, there's a deer. You got to slow down. He says, but when you drive fast, you're gripping the steering wheel. You're focused. You're looking. There's something to speed that retains to information, but also pertains to focus while moving. So I like speed because I find that when I go fast, things are flying at me quick, but I'm focused on it all because I have to be.
Yep.
And so I do agree. Going fast is actually good successfully for
Yeah,
business,
I
but I
love the
think it's
way you're
also
comparing it to focus. I think you're 100% right. I think by nature you have to grip the steering wheel. You have to be more focused. Hey, if you compare it to a bicycle, it's really hard to keep balanced on a bicycle if you're too slow. You go fast,
yeah.
you actually can you can stay upright much easier.
Yeah, that's how motorcycles work.
Yeah,
I used to have a motorcycle. That's what it was. I was like, once you're going fast, it's hard to fall over
yeah,
because you're going here, and it makes so much more sense. I love this. I love the concept of how you actually look at business too. I think I can feel a heart behind it. It's not just this, boxy, rigid, like go out here and do your thing and check sheets and balance sheets, and because there is a humanness to the best businesses, unless it's something that the world absolutely needs and you can kind of get away with not being personal. The best brands that we love that have an emotional connection, there's a humanity to it.
yeah,
And I think it's always because they treat us like humans. There's things they treat you well with customer service. There's like little things they give that are special. And like that's the thing I think that separates it. Like for me, whenever I get a new one-on-one client, I found these things called they're video boxes.
hmm
My clients don't know this. Because honestly, they just kind of get this box out of the mail. What I do is anytime a new client signs up, I have like 25 or 30 left, I want to say. And what I do is I film a video to them, like, "Hey, I want to welcome you to the group, to the family. Like, you're not gonna be part of my life. Like, we're gonna be working together. I'm gonna know your wife. You're gonna know my wife. Like, it's gonna be a weirdness in a good way,
yeah,
right?" But I give them some things, and this little nuance, like I've got people who are like, my kid still opens this up and watches the video. I hear your voice coming from my office all the time because they love it,
that's awesome.
And so, like that little thing,
Yeah,
like that little personal piece, makes the touch different and unique. But I want them to know that I actually care about them, and my business grows that way. I think.
100%.
Yeah, it's a unique little thing that's not all that hard to do, actually. Man, I have thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with you. Time flew by in the best of ways. I seriously am. I'm looking forward to being on your podcast. So if you don't mind, share a couple things. One, if you wouldn't mind, podcast you have, so people know kind of what that
hmm
is. The book, I think, would be a great place for people to go and get more information. And anything else you want to kind of conclude with?
Cool. Well, I try to keep things on brand. So both the podcast and the book are called The Self-Employed Life. The podcast is anywhere you can find a podcast these days. The Self-Employed Life book is, of course, on Amazon and all online booksellers. The other thing I've got going on, which gives me a great deal of passion, is my Self-Employed Business Institute. And that is group training as well as one-to-one coaching. It's a hybrid,
Yeah.
but that's the scalable part of my business, right? That's the part where I can have more impact on a group of people. We launch a cohort every other month, so every other month there's a new cohort beginning, and we bring everybody into the community that we've built, which is a community of all self-employed business owners. And once you've been an alumni, you're in for good, right? You always have the Institute to come back to as resources. You can come back to all the training calls, because really our goal there is to build a safe place for people to go back to, because being self-employed for many people can be lonely, and not that you're not surrounded by people, but I know for me the way loneliness showed up being self-employed pretty early on was it's lonely to make all the decisions. You can be surrounded with people, but you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders and making all the big decisions. So by putting together a community of people, you're not in it alone. You don't have to make all your decisions on your own. You can share, and chances are there's going to be somebody in our community that's been had to make a similar decision. So those are the things that I'm most passionate about, for sure.
I love it, man. Speaking my language right there, my man. If I didn't have like a couple good groups, I'd be like, I'm gonna look into this, because there was a need for me to have that, and I'm seriously blessed to have some amazing people that are in my closer inner circle that can be that. But I did have that. Like my wife and I, we both are self-employed. We have separate businesses. She loves me to death, but doesn't love what I do. Not in a sense of it's negative, but doesn't care to
Mm,
the extent that I do. Right?
yeah.
Which is it's gonna happen. And so there's that. Then she has her business, and I love what she does. I'm way more helpful for her business than she is for mine, to be quite honest. But there's a dynamic when I have like things going on. I don't have anybody to talk to at times.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, who do I ask about this? And so having these groups I have is huge, because I know that had I not had the groups when I did, I'd still be spinning my wheels, or would have made a poor decision, or would have wasted money. And also sometimes you got to vent, man. You just got to like this. I don't want an answer. I just gonna let you guys know how frustrated I am. This employee I had, this person worked for me, did this, or my team did this, or whatever. And there's a headache there. Or like I had this all this success and I couldn't celebrate with anybody
Yeah.
because I would have been gloating. But in this group, I can feel good and comfortable, and it's actually appreciated. It's like those little things are huge. If you
100%.
guys are sitting here listening, going, man, I need something like that. go reach out to this man? Where should I send them to? Oh, we already got it. The Self-Employed Life. We got that. That's the book. That's the podcast.
Yeah.
Is there a link or anything like a certain website we can go to?
Go to jeffreyshaw.com. Start there, and everything else streamlines off of it.
There you go. jeffrey.shaw.com.
You got
Beautiful. Seriously, great having you on. One final question. You can answer it however you choose to. If you're a person of faith, great. If not, we'll replace the word. But here's the question. What promise did God make to the world when he created you?
That where you can end up in life has nothing to do with where you start.
Good example. I like that one.
I try to demonstrate that, and that I expect will be. It's already been the case, but I hope the division is even greater by the time my life is over. Somebody can say, "Damn, how did he end up here?" Considering where he started, and that's a hope and promise that's available to everybody.
I like that. That's I would ache in that to myself, like being similar how I live my life, man. There's something to like my background, my experience that I should not be doing what I do right now. But like I'm a good example, I think, in my mind.
You sure are.
Where you started. So it's super cool, man. Seriously, thank you for having me on. Those of you guys who are still tuned in, thank you for being here with us and hanging out. If something resonated with you, make sure you go down the rabbit hole, find the information out. Listen to the podcast, get the book, go to jeffreyshaw.com and just find out more about the human. If you find there's someone in your life that needs to hear this, maybe there's a wife or a husband or a cousin or a brother or mom or dad who needs a little bit of help. They're doing the self-employed thing or thinking about it, but they need the nudge or the support. Send this podcast to them so they can get a chance to find that one little nugget that could open the doors for them to have some great success in the future. Outside of that, as always, make the most of your off shift moments so you can make shift happen. It's Anthony Trucks and Jeffrey Shaw signing off. Hey, thank you for tuning into the Shift podcast. I pray that we gave something amazing to your life. And if you found this episode served you in some way, I would love if you could share it with people you know, people you love, as well as your community, because you never know who needs that simple little seed that can grow into something amazing for their life. And the actual training doesn't stop here. If you want your free copy of the show notes sent to you after every episode so you can get the major points consolidated down, simply go to textanthony.com and message the word notes. Till next time, make shift happen.